guess you could probably put it on the piano.
We're good, brother.
All right. Can at least, and you could realistically just sit right here while we chat it up. Like I said, we'll just start from the very basics. Just let me know. We can pray it actually, and then like I said a lot of this. Of course, if you have anything that you have questions on, or you feel like somebody else will have questions on, and I'm not talking about, then please, for the sake of our folk on the team, yeah, we could bow our heads and pray. Pastor.
Certainly. Oh boy. Let me turn this down.
Speaking of which,
All right, let's pray. Our Father and our God, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for Churlo and Tarshala and for their willingness to give their time, their skills to you, your church, and most importantly to you, to the sharing of good news and calling men, women, boys, and girls, both in the room but also online, into a relationship with you and into growth and maturity with you. We thank you for their willingness to sharpen the saw, to be careful and excellent at what they do. And so we thank you for tonight, and we pray for those who will watch this training video later on, that they too might be under this prayer. And we pray, Father, that you'll be glorified as we give the very best that we have. We need you to add to whatever we do. We know that even with all of our preparation, we still need your grace and your power to attend what we do. But we do come here to say, Lord, here we are, and we pray that you'll prepare us to serve you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
all right. Thank you for the prayer, Pastor.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start off with just first and most importantly, the most basic thing about sound is the sound pathway. How sound, where sound starts from, where it goes to, and how we get it. Of course, and I get into like the science of it, but in the church setting, in any setting that you're using PA, personal speakers, powered speakers, and microphones and whatnot, there's a sound flow, which one I would say is very important to note down and remember, because that's how the better you understand the sound flow, the easier it will be to troubleshoot. So it'll be easier to find where the problem is, how to resolve the problem. And that's the first and most basic thing. So of course you have your microphones. In general, this is going to be where you're getting your source sound from. So somebody's singing, somebody's speaking. You have instruments that are mic'd up, instruments that are plugged directly in. You have your iPods and stuff that are plugged in the back, the computer that's plugged in the back. So you have source, then you have it all traveling to the soundboard by some medium. And from the soundboard, it comes back out to the speakers. So that's the most basic way you can cut it. Source, mixing board, whatever you have to mix something. Speaker. Sometimes you can plug your mic clearly directly into a speaker that has the input for it, and it does that all in itself. But for the sake of what we're dealing with, and in most spaces, mic, instruments, to the board, back out to the speakers. Of course, it's a little more complex in that there's some steps in between each, especially dealing with the fact that you have powered speakers, like this, speakers that require power that you have to turn on and off. And then you have passive speakers, unpowered speakers, which require an amp to give them sound. So this doesn't work without power. And that's for all the ones on the stage we have. This is passive, 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 passive. These two ones that are plugged into power are active speakers, which means they require that source of power. Then discussing the basic cabling that you're dealing with. Across the board, you have your XLRs. Right? These are generally going to be your mic cables. Some instruments can have them too, but 9 times out of 10, when you're dealing with the XLR cable, is going into some sort of mic and or to some sort of speaker. For instance, to this speaker, this XLR cable. To this one, it's a different type of cable that I don't have on hand, but have 1/4 inch, generally your instrument cables. And it's, you know, important to note the difference between your XLRs, your 1/4 inches. In general, you're dealing with 1/4 inches when you're dealing with certain instruments, primarily guitar, bass. Actually, there's some 1/4 inches on the back.
Oh, it was a keyboard.
Oh yeah, keyboard. It was just out of my mind because that one actually has XLR outputs directly on it,
Wow.
which is something that most keyboards don't have.
Right.
But yes, keyboards mainly, actually, as a keyboardist, this should be my go-to. Yeah, we deal mainly with XLR, with the 1/4 inches. You also have your 3.5s, which is your general headphone. You know, anything that you do with general sound, that you have your headphones that plug in directly to the computer, to your phone. And this whole thing itself is just an adapter. And, you know, XLR to 3.5. So you have, like I said, your main cables, your XLRs, which is what you're going to be dealing with most of the time. Then you have your 1/4 inches, which, for the sake of the fact that we're using passive speakers, in general, they tend to use 1/4 inch cables or another type of cable that we won't get into right now. And then you have all your adapters that are, you know, transforming one cable to the next. Of course, it's not always optimal to have it that way, but in some cases, you know, the adapters are just fine. Now, to get a little bit more specific about these cables in particular, which would bring us into the shape of sound, or I won't even say the shape of sound, but the orientation of sound. For 1/4 inch cables, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but some have one band on them, some have two bands on them. This one only has one band on it. This one also has one band on it. And it applies to these as well. This one has two bands on it, right? So what you're dealing with here is the type of signal that they send. The ones with one band are called a mono signal. So to set up the scene, what it looks like, you know, you have your left ear, you have your right ear. Sound could come on your left side, sound could come on your right side. Sound could come straight down the middle, based off what you're hearing. So if you have two speakers that are, of course, facing you, you have one side of the speaker that could be playing a specific sound, one side, the other speaker that could be playing a specific sound, or they both could be playing the same exact sound, which would be considered mono. Two separate sounds, spreading the sound would be considered stereo. The imagery I like to use for that is considering like it's like a straight line, and you have something either in the middle or offset. So when you're listening to it, it feels like it's more on one side than the other. You know what I'm saying? If you're listening to, for instance, a piano, the higher notes you won't hear them more to one side just because they're oriented to one side. That's if you're standing directly in front of the piano. Of course, sometimes it's so subtle that it's hard to notice. In a case like us in this church right now, running a stereo type signal would be difficult to notice because the sound of these speakers actually don't overlap, so it doesn't really apply here. But if you were to do something like that with these two speakers that are overlapping in somebody's ear, you can make it so that, you know, one side is playing a specific sound, another side is playing another sound, and they sum up to make a certain sound by the time it gets to your ears. So that's what you're dealing with when you're talking about stereo versus mono in terms of the sound. And why that's important with these cables is that a cable like this transports the stereo sound. So it's like, I'm trying to find a good way to explain it. But basically you're not getting that stereo sound with a mono cable, a one band cable. That's just not happening. Of course, if you have a space where it's like you put two mono cables, one running to the left, one running to the right, then you can. But these stereo cables sum that up into one. So that means you're gonna get one, like I said, that full sounding clear signal. I would say that's important when you're dealing with musicians, you know, guys who like to run tracks, and just tracks in general. So if you're running to your computer, 9 times out of 10, you don't want to use a mono cable because then the sound can be either distorted or it might be more prominent on the right versus left. That's where we get issues with, you know, the sound, just the sound clarity and quality. And of course, you're probably just not getting a full sound. It's like I said, it would be imagining cutting off one side of your hearing and only hearing on the other the side if you're not dealing with the right cables. That being said, like I said, we're not really dealing with a lot of stereo imaging in here, but when it comes to streaming purposes, it's actually pretty important because 9 times out of 10, you're listening to a stream on your computer, on a house set of speakers in your car, so that stereo imaging is more prominent. If the stereo sound is not through, based on the way we have it set up currently, if the stereo sound, if you have something sending only to the right side, if I go back to my house and listen to it on speakers, it will only come out the right side of the speaker. Of course, it's going to be more drastic because I'm hearing both at the same time. In here, you're not really dealing with it as much. Maybe if you had a lot more speakers, it would be a thing, but stereo and mono are important. Some engineers don't care for it, some do. But it is, in my opinion, pretty important when it comes to making sure your stream is good. So that's more or less what we have in terms of cabling. Do you have any questions or anything I should be clarifying? For sure.
As long as we don't take a test.
No. It's just for understanding's sake. Just for understanding's sake. I don't know about no test. Oh, there's another cable that I brought up here. This is an Ethernet cable, right? Of course, back in the analog days, you weren't really dealing with this cable, but this cable more so has to do with the way the system is set up versus actually, our source input like that. For instance, the stage box, which is what we're going to get into next, but the stage box right here, and also the stage box back there, that has all the XLRs plugged into it, use this cable to send information from here to the soundboard. So, for the sake of troubleshooting, if you're having an issue where all this stuff is turned on, but you're not getting any signal there, 9 times out of 10, it could be an issue with this cable. Now, not this one specifically, because there are shielded versus unshielded.
Right.
I'm not gonna get into why one works better than the other. You could just boil it down to Behringer, the brand of the board, says one spec is for its board. That means it has to be shielded in order for it to properly send the signal. Like I said, the science behind that.
Is the blue cable that's up here, is that the Ethernet?
So yes, it's an Ethernet cable. The guys who did this one spliced it, so that's why you see the black on one
Right.
end, blue on the other end. It's the same thing.
Yeah,
I
remember
would have
that one.
not spliced it, but it's the same thing. But we have had issues actually, which is I think one thing that's going to be touched up because the splicing is actually kind of shaky and it can't cut out your sound if messed around with. But yeah, so that's your Ethernet cables. That's what you're dealing with that. Also, DI boxes. There's a couple of variations of DI boxes for the camera. You have your stereo DI boxes, active DI boxes, and your passive DI boxes. In general, you're probably going to be dealing with a lot more passive DI boxes. They don't require phantom power, which we'll get into later. But DI boxes generally turn your XLR and give you 1/4 inch, right? So it would be in a case where if you had a piano that has the 1/4 inch input output, so you're plugging in the 1/4 inch, you're plugging it in to the side, you're sending out the XLR to your board or to your stage box. So that's generally how it's going to go. That's why there was some up there. It would basically be converting that signal, giving you the more balanced signal, stereo signal. I'm not actually even 100% sure. I just know that it gives you a clearer signal.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
think it used
kind
to
of just
come
standard.
From the top down the board, right?
Sound design.
I think we used to have this connected to something at the top.
Right. Sometimes you may, and I said, this is one of the more surefire ways to have any sort of 1/4 inch cable become XLR.
Okay.
In terms of transforming. So if you had, for whatever reason, like a 3.5 to 1/4 inch, you could plug it into here, XLR to your board.
Okay.
Because actually on that board, there are 1/4 inch directs, but most of them are XLR. So people just tend to stay with the XLR. Like I said, it's options. It's a matter of what's going to give you the clearest sound, what's going to be most reliable, and it depends on what you're working with. Like I said, so I know that this is a standard primarily for piano, like a lot of keyboard. You're going to have that XLR going to the stage box, but you're going to need that 1/4 inch because you're not just going to put the 1/4 inch directly in there, even though you could. This would probably just help you get a better signal. The bass amp has this built in, which is why it's plugged directly. So some instruments have it built directly in. Some sound, you have to do the transformation with this. Like I said, it's not like, I'm not gonna lie to you, like I said, it's not a matter of me getting into specifically why everything is the way it is. I'm just giving you the standards. It's just, to me, it's not the science. I could make it sounds, that's what it sounds like, that's how it's been working. And in general, whenever we move forward with the sound team, like, these are principles that basically work across the board, whether you're doing indoor, outdoor, even studio work. Yeah, so like I said, we mentioned cabling. We could talk a little bit about mics. And I'm not going to even get into all the different types of mics there are. I don't even have all of them in front of me. Your most general dynamic mics tend to be like this, or wireless mics. And honestly, it's just one of the most common mics. Of course, there's different levels of clarity and different levels of quality amongst mics. But in general, this is what you all need to start your signal with sound. If I'm speaking into it, of course, it goes through the whole chain, comes out the speakers. That being said, of course, you see these ones have the XLR. And of course, I forgot to mention, but it's pretty self-explanatory though, but you have male side, you have female side. That's just how they label it. So that would just give you an indication if somebody's like, oh, I need a male-to-male XLR. That means they need one with both this side on it. I don't know why somebody would need that. But if you need a male-to-male, you need this side. And then this is the female side. Same thing with the same thing with the 1/4 inch male side. This would be considered female. And I say it's pretty self-explanatory as to why. But that's just for the sake of knowing what cables are which. If somebody asks you for a specific type of cable, then you can just be like, okay, I have this or I don't have this. And knowing that in general, when you're dealing with like inputs and outputs, there's usually going to be a difference. Output is generally going to be female ones. So on the back of your speakers, you're going to be plugging in that female side, plugging into the female side. And if you're doing an input, like for instance, just to make the example clear for everybody here, this is the output. This would be considered input. This is the output. And this will be going into your board.
Right.
So that's the kind of chain that it just follows. If that makes sense. So, as I said, if you have a pair of eyes on you, it's pretty simple. But it is important to know that there's a lot of variations, a lot of different cables. So, so like I said, going back to the mics, we're dealing with a lot of dynamic mics in here. There are lapel mics. They all have different type of pickup patterns. In general, your mic like this, the dynamic ones, have a pickup pattern that's like this. So there's no real sound like here. So of course, if it's plugged in, you're not talking into it like this and getting a clear sound. That means moving forward, when you're dealing with speakers and you're dealing with singers, you gotta let them know, if they don't already know, that there is mic etiquette. There's a way to hold your mic to get the clearest sound. There's a distance and there's a direction. Realistically, I know I fall for this. I think it's cool to hold a mic like this. It's technically not the best way, if we're being honest. I think it's cool though, like it's relaxed, it's easy. But if you have this issue. I actually had this happen on Sabbath while I was doing the sound. The wonderful lady who be doing children's story,
Catherine Scott.
she tends to like do like this.
Yeah.
So I have to turn up the gain more in order to grasp that sound that's coming like this, so that it's not soft. Because BC was just talking on the same mic. BC is loud. It's cool.
Mhm.
They pass it over, and there's an issue with hearing her, and that's something of course, mic etiquette would fix. But for the sake of the fact that I couldn't go up there and be like, hey, turn your mic, I just turned up the gain so that that range effectively got a little bit bigger, and you were able to catch a little more volume.
Right.
It's not ideal because that opens you up to feedback and all this other stuff. But for the sake of making sure that all your praise team, singers, speakers are on the same, technically like this, directly into the mic. Some mics don't have a big pickup range, so they might have you be like right here. But 2 to 6 is general. And I said there might be more standards if you're getting into like the recording, but for the sake of having clear sound projected to your house, you need to have proper mic etiquette. And this also matters because this is important to feedback, which is one of the main problems the church will deal with, or main problem you will deal with speakers in general. Of course, if your mic is pointing directly into this, you're gonna get a lot of feedback. Now, of course, there is a way to negate that feedback dealing with frequencies. That's something we would get into when we get onto the board. But just know, it's not ideal for you to do like this and point your mic at your speakers, because something about that causes frequencies. I actually don't even know why, I just know how to fix it. But that's the science of sound, you know what I'm saying? It's probably something to do with the fact that sound is supposed to be going in this, coming out that, and since it's like right in front of each other with that proximity, it's doing something weird with the little airwaves and whatnot. But don't quote my word on that. That's what I would assume based off of how speakers and how mics work. I guess one of the last things we can do up here, well, second to last, is remember I said we have our stage box. That's what's getting our signal to this. So we have inputs into here. Right now, the piano is plugged into this stage box. And then it's being sent to here. Also, not only does it send information from here to here, it also receives information from the computer to the board, to the stage box. And this is going to be, standard across all devices that are considered stage boxes. You have this one here, this one on top, and then you have that one over there, which is slightly different form, same thing. It has inputs and outputs on it, Ethernet, and it's powered. This one is, like I said, receiving the keyboard and it's going to here, but it's also getting signal from there, and these are where our speakers are actually plugged into. So instead of being plugged in directly to the board, they're plugged into the stage box, and that's how you get your flow of signal, because it can send and receive signals. Same thing like that. If they decided to culminate them into one, it'll be the same thing. And then remember, we have passive speakers, which means they require power. That's this thing right here. Powered amps. Of course, there's a lot of different form factors. This one is some Mackie, I think. There's a lot of different brands, all the different brands. You could have these ones. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are clearer. Some of them have more output, so you can use more. But generally speaking, you need this to be able to use this, because it's passive. Like by itself, I can't just plug something in here and expect it to play. I could plug something in here and expect it to play, but I can't do the same with that without going through that first. So that means I'm getting signal from my board to my stage box to my amp to the speakers. And like I said, that's how we start to build that web of troubleshooting. If I'm getting sound from my mic and it's getting to the stage box, but my powered speakers are not on, I wouldn't be getting sound to here. If you're not getting sound to here, you can just trace your way back. See if it's the issue that is at the powered amp, or if it's an issue all the way at the top of the chain, which would be you're just not getting sound from your mic, period. See what I'm saying? So that's how we deal with troubleshooting. So this is what we're gonna be, kind of going back and forth into, because everything at the end of the day deals with knowing the flow of the sound and then understanding how to jump in at any given point and deal with whatever's there. I would say last thing I could ask you is what is the sequence that you turn stuff on in?
When I come in, I turn on I don't know what the thing is called in the back.
Soundboard.
I turn that on.
The
No, in the
soundboard you
very
mentioned.
back.
In the room.
Oh, in the room.
Yes.
Okay.
The rack.
Yes.
Okay.
I do that first. And then I turn on the board.
The little mic thingies over there.
Now the little boxes that tells me the battery.
Right. Those are mic receivers, the
Yeah.
wireless mic receivers.
Then I turn on down here. I turn the speakers on. 1, 2, and then the little box over there.
And in general, there's a reason why you do that order. It's actually, one, to protect your speakers, because I don't know if you've ever turned it on in the wrong direction or in the wrong sequence, but you might get like pop sounds, and those pop sounds can actually break your speakers if it gets bad.
I hate the pop sound.
Yeah, I hate it too because it's money. I just feel money coming out of my pocket, even though it's not mine. But I just feel it coming out of my pocket every time you hear the pop sounds. So yes, of course, in general, aside from the setup and the racking and stuff in the back, you're going to generally turn on your soundboard first, then whatever stage boxes and powered amps you got on, and then your speakers. And in general as well, it would probably be the reverse of that to turn it off. You don't want to turn off your soundboard first; your speakers will pop.
Alright.
You don't want to turn off your sound box because it's effectively the same thing as turning off your board. Your speakers will pop.
Right.
Um,
So when I turn off, I always push the button that says shut down, but I don't turn anything on the board off. That's the only thing, and then I turn off the back, and then go in reverse from the front, and then the board is always the last thing I turn off.
and that is key. It's actually crazy because I'm not familiar with the rack or what's going on in that little room back there. Nobody's actually told me about that for here, but I guess when I came in to do sound on Sabbath morning, I went in order from the board through here, and it was
Well, somebody must have left it on.
probably.
Because
So
none of it would work if that
that's a
wasn't-
power. Is that a power thing or is that a?
I'll show it to you. Yeah.
It might be. It might have been on because it was definitely on the night before too. So I'm not. Oh, they did have the funeral the day before. So it could have been on since then. But yeah, so that's the general.
Well, I worked the funeral. I know I shut it down.
Oh,
but
that's awkward.
somebody could have come in.
Yeah.
Sometimes the school practice is, I don't know. But yeah, I ran the funeral and I shut everything down. But
Well,
it's not locked up, so
right.
Was there sound during Sabbath school?
Say that again.
Sabbath school.
No, it wasn't. It didn't. It wasn't on until I came in.
Okay.
I came in probably like 10, 15-ish, and they were just, whenever they wrap up Sabbath school. Like I came in just in time to have them on to have the mic for them to close off Sabbath school. So it was like 10, 15 or so. And I just went in the sequence and everything was cool. So it must have still been on. But yeah, so that is the most basic of the sound path. Is that everything I said so far makes sense? I'm pretty sure you most of it. But I would say for Pastor, as you've been listening, the whole sequence of everything makes sense.
yeah, it does. I suppose what I would question is, how do you know the proper way to plug those up? I understand the path. They have to be plugged into something powered. But how do you know which goes into which to plug up those monitors?
In general, some do have specific markings, because not all passive speakers just take 1/4 inch. Some of them have, I'm forgetting what the cable is specifically, because it's a special type of cable that you're not gonna really run into much. but it's like this on the end.
Oh, okay.
And of course, you know, they will have a specific labeling. One of them, in some cases, at least the ones that I've dealt with, they will have an input and a link. Your input would be the one that you're going to get sound from. Your link is to, of course, link one to the next. That way, as you see, we have 4 passive speakers on the stage, but there's actually, if I'm not mistaken, only 2 outputs on your average amp. Some might have 4, but in general, most of them only have 2 channels, which means 2 outputs. That means you would technically, if you had no links, you would only be able to run 2 passive speakers. But what's basically happening is when you get sound to each channel on this board, you have a channel 1, channel 2. You can send a specific, you know, set of sounds to channel 1, specific set of sounds to channel 2. That's how we have. The pulpit is, I forgot which one here, but the pulpit is one set, and then these ones on the outer edge are another set. And that's why you, like I said, you would go into the link, you will go into the input, and then you could link them over. So it will go from link here to input on the other one.
So whichever one is going into the outside, the link is going all the way to the other side.
Yeah, so this one is linked all the way to that one.
Right, and then the other one is linked there and linked to the other one on the other side of the pulpit.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the setup in general. Of course, sometimes you may want to have each 4 do something different, then you would have a different setup. But in general, the ones on the pulpit are gonna be linked together because there's no real reason to not do it like that. Like I said, it's just a matter if you want a stereo sound, you would have to split it apart, send a set of sounds here, set of sounds there. If you want, you know, different mixes for different singers, you could technically split up this and that one so that it's like, oh, if the tenors on this side want to hear better here,
Right.
then you would make it so that this is standalone, that is standalone.
Right.
But as I said, dealing with 3 singers, you're not. They're too close to really make that distinction. But I said you have options. You have options on your board to do up to 12, maybe 18 different sets of sounds that you can set as monitors. But of course, you can't do it all passive if you don't have enough racks for enough amps to run them.
Right.
But if they were all powered, it wouldn't really matter. They'd be plugged in, and then, you know, it would be, I would say that's the one thing powered has over unpowered is the flexibility, since you could plug in directly to them. So you don't have to link them to something that's giving them power and sound. Because it doesn't only give them power, but it does give them the sound signal. So it's like, if all of these were powered, then you'd have 4 different signals available to send to each, to customize each. Which in some cases would be good, some cases it's not super necessary. Like I said, it's a matter of what you want and what you're dealing with. So hopefully that clears up the whole linkage and the inputs to the rack, or to the amp, which would be mounted on a rack. Let's see. If there's anything else specifically up here.
How are the in-ears connected in the flow?
How are the in-ears connected to the flow? So remember we said we have the stage box on that side, and we have this type of cable right here, this Ethernet cable. It is very good at sending a multitude of signals in one singular cable, right? Same way we have this receiving and sending information to the board is the same way this receives and sends information from the board to your in-ear, which is the P16s. I'm sure you know what those look like. These little boxes that the musicians all have. Speaking of which, actually, let me just grab the one up here so I can do a detailed explanation.
Am I that student that's asking too many questions when you're trying to get out of class? Tarshala.
Huh?
Am I that student that keeps asking questions when you're ready to go home?
But yeah, like I said, so like I said, you have your P16s. and there's a lot of different forms of in-ear monitoring. The thing with the P16s is that it gives you the ability to make your own mix in your own ears. So in general, when routed right, musicians and or singers who use it, but generally musicians would have no issue about they can't hear one thing or another because they could just turn it up for themselves, turn it down for themselves. For instance, on Sabbath, what I had ended up doing was routing their in-ears so that they could have the lead singer in one channel and the background vocal in another channel. That way they could turn up the lead singer because they really need to hear the lead singer, and separate it from the background vocals and turn them down slightly so that they could hear if the lead singer decides to say a transition versus sign a transition. That's one of the things that they had requested of me to do while I was here, and we were able to set it up for them. Now, the way you get the information, you have your Ethernet right here on the back, you have your in, and you have your through. In is where you're getting your signal from the board. Through is if you want to connect one P16 to another P16, which then of course you would do through to in, if that makes sense. Input, sending to another. On your stage boxes, on this stage box in particular, it has the information that's needed to use this cable to send to this right here. So all of our P16s currently are plugged into that stage box, which then uses the same cable to get information from one of these stage boxes to go back to the board.
The smaller one?
Yeah, one that's on.
Okay,
That's on.
by the table.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that stage box is the thing that's sending all the information to this. So, yeah, it uses the same thing, Ethernet cables. Of course, I said there's a difference between unshielded and shielded. For instance, in general, without a specific box of power, which that one acts as, this cable can't power this alone. It will need a power cable. But because that box supplies that power, you can just plug this into that box and get the signal, and you don't even need a power cable. Actually, none of those are even plugged into power. They can just run off of this cable alone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing about specs and stuff like that. You know, each company has there's a reason for it, like I said, a more proper scientific reasoning for why a specific cable can hold a specific type of signal better. In general, shielded tends to be one less noisy, better over distances. So something like, 100 feet versus 500 feet is probably not going to be possible to do with the unshielded cable, 500 feet versus shielded. So like I said, it's just small stuff like that. But it really all boils down to how the thing is just made in the first place. It's made so that it supports, a certain type of cable. And that way you can power this without external power. The same way, it's preferred to have a shielded cable to go from your box to here so that you're not getting sound leakage or bad signal. As well as the fact that in general, because, it is a requirement that the board has, if you do use an uncompatible cable, that's what it is. You're just using an uncompatible cable. Even though they look the same, there are major differences across the level of cabling, which is probably why they had to do this, to splice unshielded into shielded to be able to get it to even work in the first place. Assumption, not 100% sure because I wasn't there for the process. But if we're going on based off these cords, these are unshielded. So, and you could tell by the writing on them. Like I said, that's getting more into the nuance of certain things. But yeah, so that's how we get our sound to the P16s, which is also important to know because there's a page on the board, of course, that controls what goes to what on the P16.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's no other major questions, honestly, this could be a solid stopping point because the next thing we'd be going to is the board, which can be done in 1 to 2 parts, which will require knowing the ins and outs of what all the board can do, and then dealing with your actual mixing. So that would be setting the right volumes, dealing with the dynamics, which would be compression, gain, stuff like that, and then also dealing with feedback, which would be EQs, and then all the other little nuances and tricks that would make, you know, it sound better on a week-to-week basis, and then just give you better, like I said, better control over the situation. At the end of the day, for the goal of the class is to give you as much control as possible for whatever you're going to deal with. Because of course, one day we might be dealing with more than just 3 singers and a lead. Might be dealing with, I mean, we're already dealing with the choir soon. You know, that's going to be a whole other set of techniques to really be able to bring out the best of the choir mics when the time comes. I said Sabbath, we use the piano, you know, so stuff like that. But yeah, so I think this is a solid stopping point in terms of just a very introductionary stuff. And hopefully, you know, it just gives or reiterates the basis on how to troubleshoot as well for sound mainly at the source.
Okay. And then we will be here with maybe the praise team on a Thursday.
We probably do one more session and then be here with the praise team,
Okay.
because I do want to. I want to get over all the functions of the board first. So that way, when the praise team is here, we're not doing the functions and working with them. We can just work with them. I feel like the functions are going to take a little more time because, like I said, there's a lot. And of course, eventually, once it gets set up to a point where everything is like so streamlined and stuff, you won't be dealing with tweaking as much. But it's still important to know because from a week-to-week basis, reason why sometimes it sounds better one week and not as good the next week could just simply be the fact that because you're dealing with different singers, you need to set them at different volumes, gain-wise, not fader-wise. So that gives you automatically, like, you know, just a better standard. Do you know who is doing sound on Sabbath? Oh, well, there you go. I don't know if Tyson is coming in tomorrow. I would, in general, it would be my recommendation for whoever's doing the sound to, if they have the opportunity, visit the praise team the night before and set their volume so that you don't have to do it Saturday morning. I will say that for the sake of sound on Sabbath, if it's still the way it was from last Sabbath, that gray is now the lead mic.
The gray one is?
Yes. And purple is just your speaker mic. And the rest you can deal with as you wish. But for the sake of the fact that it's kind of set up so that the gray is the lead mic per Tears' request from last week. I would say moving forward until things change, you keep gray as the lead mic. If there's no other questions though, Pastor Lynn, I feel like this is a good stopping point for this little intro.
Can we just change all the microphones?
Eventually, I would say, and that's one thing I would say too. All this stuff would come in handy when you are switching mics and stuff like that, because, like I said, they all have a different pickup pattern. Or, you know, sometimes I think, if I'm not mistaken, as your mics continue to get older, your the frequency response changes. So a newer mic is prone to certain feedback frequencies, older mic prone to other ones.
Yeah.
So it's
And,
like,
you know, I always say microphone, when you talk about microphone etiquette, I tell people all the time, my pet peeve when you're holding that microphone and you don't know if the mic is on or not and you hit the thing, and I'm like, can we not do that?
right, because
That drives
realistically
me
it's not.
crazy.
Yeah, it's realistically not good for the life of the microphone to
Right.
be smacking at it.
And it just,
Um,
like, oh my goodness.
it
You don't hit the mic. You
Right.
never hit it. But it's like people are so conditioned to
right.
hit the
I
microphone.
actually don't even know where that came from.
I have
Preachers.
No
Oh.
idea.
People aren't saying amen. Is this mic on?
Cause like when the kids would come over for chapel, you know, they would hit, I'll be like, please don't hit the microphone. Don't hit it. Cause you're killing it.
That is, I would say, a good part of mic etiquette, making sure that, you know, when you're testing and seeing if the mic is on and stuff, that you don't, what do you call it?
Yeah.
Not hitting it, not dropping it, of course. But speaking, which, you know, is something we will deal with when we get to the praise team, but whenever you're dealing with them, you gotta let them know. Speak or sing at the volume that you plan at speaking or
Right.
singing at. Or else, you set it up one way, it's not going to be how you want it when you actually get into it. That's important.
And every praise team or every singer or whatever is different.
Right.
Because some people really want to be loud, and it's kind of like you're trying to tell them, we can hear you, but it's like they want it louder, and it's like, no, because I don't want you to, it has to blend well in order to sound good to the people who are listening.
Right. So this is where we would deal with learning how to really split up your vocals and deal with your vocals on stage and having your mix out into the house. Because in some cases, not every time, but in some cases, a singer probably really can't hear themselves here, but they are very loud here. So to you, it's hard because it's like, okay, you're blasting. I can tell you're very loud. This is what I was, so for instance, I said I dealt with a lot of, I wouldn't say I dealt with a lot of it, but, I was working with the singers. I mean, I was trying to be very, very intentional about dealing with what we were doing with sound on Sabbath. So what I did was, one, like I said, after I got the musicians situated in terms of hearing who they wanted to hear, at what volumes they wanted to hear it at, I made sure, one, to guarantee that they could all hear themselves as they want on stage. And once you're at that type of level here, you mix it here for these monitors, which is not the same as your regular outs. You can mix what's coming out of here slightly different. This is where, your fader work is going to come in important. So the thing is with gain, it's important because the way we have our stuff set up at the moment and probably for the future, your gain is the foundation. So that gain knob up in the corner is going to determine whether or not you get a clear signal for everything else you need the board to do, which is another part of the signal path. If we're dealing with signal path physically, that's signal path digitally. That gain kind of starts everything off. If it's too low, then it's just going to get weaker and die throughout the process, sending it to speakers, sending it to the stream, all this other stuff. It might not literally get weaker and die, but it's not high quality enough. It's not clear enough. You can't do as much to it. You can't, change your frequencies and EQ it out or compress it and make sure that, it's not too loud and clipping and going into the rain, all this type of stuff. Which, those nuances are something that require a lot more explanation. But if you're able to get them good here, and then you can get the rest of the house good out here, then everybody's happy because they're not talking about, I can't hear myself. And you're not over here talking about, I can only hear the tenors. And so I tried to make sure that last week we had a good mix in the house. Because, of course, sitting up here is still not 100% the most ideal spot to sit at, to mix, based on where the speakers are placed. But at the same time, if it's loud enough, you get a general gist of what's going on. And I can tell if I'm hearing one person over the other, especially since we had 3 ladies doing background vocals. I can clearly tell, the tenor versus the alto. And of course, they did tell me who was who, so there was that to do as well. That gives you, like I said, a little more flexibility. So that's another thing we want to build, because there's the instances, Pastor Goodman, I say, you want more of yourself in the monitors, or you want less of yourself in the monitors, just too loud here. At the same time, though, you want to keep the sound here. So it's like, make sure you know where to go to turn him down here. So if he says less in the monitors, you're not turning him down everywhere. Or if you want more in the monitors, you're not turning it down everywhere. Turning it up everywhere. And that, that's another thing where I think as a sound person, you kind of have to really know, one, of course, what everybody wants, but also have the image of what you want the room to sound like at any given moment. Like what sounds good. Of course, to you, as well as what is meeting the purposes of the people in the room. Because honestly, there's some weeks it's just too soft, and that might be my musician side speaking. I like loud. But at the same time, for me, a certain amount of volume is needed to carry the energy. So you can't be preaching, doing your thing on stage, but you're like this all the way back there. You know what I'm saying? Because your sound is not coming out, the speaker's loud enough. Now, all your energy that you're doing, I don't even want to say energy, but what you're trying to portray to your people is getting lost in translation, because it's like you're excited, but you sound soft and far away. So it kind of just looks like you're acting up there, or it just looks like you're just up there. like, oh, that's cool, but it's hard. It's hard to break that because that's just instinctive reaction. You see it. It's like you see a lot going on, but you don't hear a lot going on.
Right.
That's a problem. And me, I know for me that's been an issue when I'm on stage. Like you can't even get excited. Like it's like damn, like the guys in the back just looking at me and it's like a whisper. It's like man, I can't even get you to respond because you're just trying to hear what I'm saying in the first place. Which is why I feel like Saturday I really tried to make sure to cut BC up in terms of where I felt like it was normally because I normally sit in the middle, near the front, near the speaker, so I know when it's soft or not. And I made sure from where I was sitting back there on Sabbath that it was filling the room. You got a lot of space. The ceiling is high.
Right.
You go in, if this thing is not closed, you're going into the gym and you got all these rooms. So the sound is not being contained in the first place, or it's probably not even particularly treated for. Like you can hear the cars passing by when it's quiet like this. It's not 100% soundproof. So all your sound is not staying here and spreading. So you kind of have to compensate by turning up appropriately. I said appropriately to everybody else may be different, and of course it can't be too loud because you do have people sitting right in the front. So just finding that balance, that mix, which is something I had noticed too on Sabbath when I came up to check these things because I felt like it was a little soft. That these were not even at the same volume here on these because you can change this volume, and they were not. So I turned them up and made them the same volume so that it's at least balanced. Because that one was like 2 or 3 dB softer, which dB might not mean nothing to you, but that's how humans hear, and like it gets exponentially smaller. So the lower you get dB wise, like the less sound exponentially it is. So you would mix within a small range of dB, like -3 to +3, and you could tell a difference in that sound. But like from -60 to -infinity, it's a whole different realm of what the sound is. So you know what I'm saying? Just that change in making sure the volume is where you're supposed to be at your output. So that's another thing. Volume at the source, volume at the board, volume at the output. In general, you're not really dealing with, well, actually that's false. A lot of speakers have their own volume. Even these have the volume, but they're on that. So that's something to deal with too. Sometimes you might be pushing up all your volume on the board, but it's just these are just not loud. And that could be rectified by turning these up, turning your board to a respectable mixing level.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like I've spoken a lot of other information. If there are any other questions, anything else to clarify to make sure we're good and cohesive for today. I think we're good. I said I think we'll do just one more session. Get to really know the board and deal with some of the actual sound editing process. And then even afterwards too, I'll probably even drop some tutorial videos that I think are pretty good that will give us even more insight. I think that's it though. That's it. You can pray us out again, Pastor, if you would like.
All right. Any special prayer requests, Tashawn? Any special prayer requests?
Rest.
Yeah. Charlo, you said rest?
Yeah. No, I was speaking for her. Sorry.
Oh.
So she needs that rest. She needs the rest of God.
Sleep. No.
And then I would just say, this is the family. Family, starting a new job, I will need some help because I do.
When do you start?
I have to pick up a badge tomorrow. I'm assuming sometime next week. It's an overnight shift. But I'm assuming at some point next week. The issue is I'm confused because they're saying I need 40 hours of on-the-job training first before I can start regularly working. I mean, it is kind of extensive. Is the camera still rolling?
Yeah, but I mean, are you ready to stop?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was